Hello, Avatar fans. This is. Oh god, I completely forgot how to introduce them. What was it? Okay, hello, Avatar fans. Hello and welcome. That's what I do. Why did I just completely blank on the word welcome? Um, okay. Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 209 of our regular shows. We're recording this on March 28th, 2020. We're going to do a news-focused show this week, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So we will get pretty much straight into it here. We've obviously got one big kind of major announcement that just recently happened that we're primarily here to talk about, but there's a few other things that have happened since the last podcast. Obviously, the world has changed pretty much as well since the last podcast, but there's also been some Avatar news as well, which is what we're here to focus on. So the first thing, and I think this was actually something I forgot to mention on the last podcast, but this is that the Avatar The Last Airbender Imbalance Library Edition has had a date change. So this book has been delayed. Previously, it had the May 13th and May 26th as the comic book store and mass market dates. Now it is scheduled for June 16th. So, it's been pushed back by pretty much like a month, a couple of weeks here. No reason, as usual, was given for this. It just changed on a few websites. I don't know if this is because of the virus or if this is just one of these kind of dark horse changes where they just do it and nothing comes up. Again, it's one of these, usually the library editions don't have date changes because they are just collected editions and there's nothing too crazy to put together with them. But maybe with this one, I think there is going to be annotation commentary in it because they're still doing the Avatar books in that way. And there's probably still some work to be done on like editing maybe the art extras at the back together, but delayed by about a month. Not too big of a problem with what's happening, but what are your thoughts on this delay?
Yeah, no, it's so unfortunate, but yeah, I mean, I could see. I don't know. Sometimes it does take a bit to actually sort of collect it together, and like you said, with the annotations and stuff, that I could see that taking a bit more work to start just getting together. And then I don't know, since these books still are printed, there is that whole sort of supply chain of getting that together. So that always takes a bit of work too as well. But it doesn't seem like it's too much delayed as of now, so that's not too bad.
Yeah. I suppose at this point we probably should mention, obviously that the comic book industry is being pretty heavily affected by the virus. As far as I'm aware, I did see Dark Horse put out some sort of a statement on social media about this, that they're not going to be releasing any comics that, like, digitally, that will have a physical release, but that they're continuing to do sort of like collected editions and I suppose art book style things, where they can still release it through the sort of like kind of mass market bookstore, like online store chain or whatever. So I think what that means is that the library edition and probably the omnibus as well won't be, like, you'll still be able to get them, but it will probably be on the mass market date, so the later date. And I suppose I think the omnibus does have a digital copy, so I don't really know how that's necessarily affected. But the library edition, if you order from, I suppose, Amazon, you probably should still be able to get it. And then the new comic that was recently announced is far enough, like, towards the end of the year where we should hopefully be getting back to normal, and that should be released normally, I guess. I don't know, did you see any of what Dark Horse said about their thoughts, how they're approaching doing releases and so on?
No, actually, I didn't see anything about that.
Yeah, let me just see, can I find it here on Dark Horse's Twitter, because we probably should mention this. Here's what they said. To all of our retail partners, we hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. As I write this, the coronavirus continues to threaten the health of our family and communities. With distributors shutting down or reducing capacity, retailers and printers are closing their doors. And with increasingly stringent government rules, it has become challenging to conduct business as usual. We know this has been an incredibly difficult time for everyone. It is important that you know Dark Horse is committed to helping support your business throughout this trying time. It seems that market conditions change on a daily basis, which makes formulating a response difficult. While the details are still being worked out, here are our initial action items. We will immediately reduce our monthly output of both comics and graphic novels for the coming months. Dark Horse will indefinitely offer 90-day fully returnable terms on all periodicals on final order cutoff. Again, this is specifically to like retailers that they're saying this. Dark Horse will continue to explore a variety of options intended to help our retail partners. Updates will be coming. And then they also posted another update about digital stuff. We will not be releasing any comics digitally that are not also available in print. We still have collections, original graphic novels, and art books shipping through our bookstore distributor, Penguin Random House. Those respective titles will be made available digitally the same day they are available from retailers. So my understanding of that is that our reprint books that we have expected should be fairly okay. They're just comic book store release date will be affected, but the normal date won't, which seems fairly okay. And just because we don't have any other books like coming out during the next like couple of months, like Avatar content shouldn't be overly affected, assuming Dark Horse kind of make it through this okay. But do you have any thoughts on what their approach is?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, considering everything, sort of, how you adjust to everything that's going on is really sort of like up in the air since no one really knows how to deal with it, unfortunately. But yeah, that is interesting that that's just the way that they chose to do it. I mean, I don't know, everyone seems to have a different response to this. Some places are just throwing everything up on digital. Some places are trying to sort of hold it back, which just seems to be more of the route that Dark Horse is going. I wonder, I guess it really just depends how long everything, hopefully takes to sort of reset itself, because that is sort of unfortunate. I mean, I guess some of the other Avatar stuff is farther out and the other stuff is reprint, so that is, in theory, should be okay. I don't know. I haven't gotten any of the library editions through the digital, so I don't know if that's, as much of a worth for it. So it should be interesting to see how this plays out in the long run.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the library editions just don't have a digital release, which is why I think it's kind of significant that I think the Omnibus editions are getting a digital release, but we'll see about that. So yeah, that mainly I suppose is more about like single issue comics like coming out monthly more than anything. I think just because those books sell through comic stores and like bookstores don't get single issue comics and so on. So Avatar isn't affected because we don't ever get single issue comics, unfortunately, I suppose. Next up, with the Promise Omnibus edition, we finally have the cover revealed for this. They said this would be revealed like soon, back in like November, and like again it was only revealed like a week or two ago. But it is Team Guru on the art here. I think it looks really, really nice. Kind of white, plain background, but then you have sort of Aang and Momo in the front. Really nice pose for Aang. And then sort of in the background, kind of sort of faded a little bit into the background, you have Sokka, Katara, Zuko, and Toph, all in really nice poses. It's really emphasizes Girihuru's style. And I definitely like it a lot, especially if they're going for this sort of style with the omnibus editions where it's going to have sort of plain backgrounds, which are different than say the library editions, which all have sort of darker backgrounds. That's the way the books look if you have any of them. Like the spines are all dark as well, so if the omnibus editions are kind of brighter, that seems like a cool kind of change up for me. But what are your thoughts on the new cover?
I think the cover looks really cool. I definitely dig the style. I mean, it's Team Guru, so, their stuff is always pretty cool. So it's nice to see how it is. And yeah, it is a pretty interesting how, it is sort of on a lighter background, which definitely, I don't know, it makes it seem, have more levity to it than, overly serious or anything like that, even though, the book obviously deals with some serious topics as most of the books do. So no, I think it's definitely really good.
Yeah. Now, at this point, like we still don't know for sure if they're gonna do the Search Omnibus, the Rift Omnibus, but realistically they probably will. It just hasn't been announced yet. I am interested to see how they go about doing the covers for the other books when or if they get announced and that. I like kind of the group character shots, but like it does get a little boring at times. So like you'd hope for like the Search Omnibus, like it's not Aang in the front, and like it is more of kind of like the Search hardcover is, and it's like it has your other characters there. You'd hope they emphasize like Ursa on that cover as well as Zuko and Azula, but we have to wait and see on that. But it is great to see Team Guru back for sure. Um, so that's that. Next is probably one of the more interesting kind of things, and it's this news article. It was more of a interview in the kind of aftermath of Runes of the Empire Part 3. It's an interview with Michelle Wong and also Rachel Roberts, and we're not going to go through the whole thing because the only real interesting thing I find in the entire article is basically the first question. The question that Newsarama asked is, to jump right into it, I'm sure many fans want more Korra after reading Turf Wars and Runes of the Empire. What future plans do you have for Legend of Korra comics? Rachel Roberts, who's the editor, her answer is this. We're not quite ready to share specific news yet, but I think fans of both Avatar and Korra will be quite pleased with what we're cooking up. We have several fun new projects in the works that will not only expand our publishing line, but will introduce new formats and approaches to these beloved franchises. So this is sort of the style of statement we've been waiting for ages about these comics, of just addressing sort of the direction of them going forward. So it's nice, even though it's vague, it's nice to just get like Avatar and Korra will be getting books. There'll be multiple books. She says several, not just like, I suppose, one for each. Different formats, different approaches, which we've already seen one of, which we'll get to in our sort of big news for this podcast. So this is definitely exciting, and we're still sort of waiting to see the full scope of like what this new lineup of books is for Avatar and Korra. But what were your thoughts on this response here from Rachel Roberts?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely pretty cool to hear that because, like you're saying, we've been, suggesting for a while now that they, there are more ways for them to sort of publish content rather than like the standard, 3-part trilogy and then, library edition afterwards. Like, just looking at the comic industry as a whole, as far as, what's been published, there's all these different ways of doing them that, it seems like Avatar fans would be open to. The ones that are into the comics, like we've seen online and stuff, they're pretty open to just, more content in general. I mean, I guess that's always just sort of the thing that people are always looking for in general, is just more stuff. So, there's definitely, a reason to do it, which it seems like, now they're at the point where they're able to do it.
Yeah, it is interesting that they decided that like now is the time. Like they don't really mention the anniversary here, but it's sort of interesting that it's happening at the 15-year anniversary mark.
Yeah.
But yeah, the new formats is probably the main thing to take from this, and what we saw is that, okay, one of those new formats is going to be sort of one-shot graphic novels, like solo, standalone stories that are just one part long, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But they're talking about new formats, like as in multiple new formats. So are we going to get 2-part stories, 4-part stories, or will we actually get like a single issue monthly comic, which a lot of people have been asking for? We just need the ability to tell different types of stories, because not every Avatar story fits into 3 parts. Some of them need to be shorter, some of them need to be longer, some won't work having to be sort of split up into 3 parts like that. So this is good to see. And the other thing is that like this potentially opens the door for stuff that's like published by Dark Horse but isn't necessarily just like a comic or a graphic novel, in that like Dark Horse have done this sort of stuff before, like the Zelda, what's it called, like Hyrule Historia, like an encyclopedia style book.
Oh yeah.
Could we get something like that? That's like a new approach, and like a really official, really well, nicely done book covering that sort of stuff. would be really cool to see. But we'll speculate more about this after we get to this big announcement here, which is what we've been waiting for a while, and finally we have our first Dark Horse new Avatar comic for 2020 announced. It is called Avatar: The Last Airbender, Katara and the Pirate Silver. Written by Faith Erin Hicks, illustrated by Peter Wortman and Adele Matera. It's going to be out October 13th, 2020, and oddly, I don't think we know which exact way they're going with the comic book store release date. It's either going to be October 14th or September, the last day of September, depending on what way they consider this. But realistically, if this goes the same way as the other comics, it should be October 13th and 14th is the release date for this. We'll get into the description in a second, but I suppose just this is what the announcement is. It's not a part one or anything like that. It's just a one book. It is the same format and style as a part in that it's 6 by 9 inches is the size of the book, 80 pages, so it's going to be like 72 pages of story. So it basically is a one-part story. So it's something we've kind of been asking for. But what are your thoughts on this as the announcement for the next Avatar comic?
I think it's definitely pretty cool. I mean, it's definitely not something that I would have necessarily thought of just out of the blue or anything like that. I mean, it's cool to have, any of our characters have like their own sort of solo stories because, they do go on their own adventures. We have seen that in the show and stuff. So I think it's really cool that they're doing, and they definitely put, a popular enough character, of course, that, it's definitely going to do well regardless. So no, I think it's definitely pretty cool. From the cover, it looks pretty interesting. So that's definitely a plus for me for sure.
Yeah, like my initial reaction was just like, okay, like cool, they're doing something different. It's a new format. That's what we've wanted. But at the same time, it is also a bit of a surprise in that this isn't this approach of like where they're going with the story here isn't really what anyone was asking for. In that we just wanted different formats and styles of story in the era we were in right now. Like, why are we going back into Avatar? Because that's what this basically reveals to us, is that this story has to be set during Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I'll read the description here, and you can figure it out from here where it's being set. So it says here, it's sink or swim for Katara. When Team Avatar is suddenly ambushed by the Fire Nation, Katara gets separated from the group. Unable to rendezvous with Aang, Toph, and Sokka, Katara must avoid capture by aligning herself with some unlikely allies. The normally sweet and sensitive Katara will need to explore her tougher side if she's going to reunite with the rest of Team Avatar. Written by Faith Erin Hicks, drawn by Peter Wortman, colors by Adele Matera, and letters by Comicraft Jimmy Betancourt, in collaboration with Avatar: The Last Airbender animated series writer Tim Hendricks. So no mention of Mike O'Brien is kind of interesting. We've seen Tim Hendricks mentioned before in descriptions for comics, but relatively recently. And then we know it's set during ATLA, because why would Team Avatar be ambushed by the Fire Nation if we're post ATLA? And then based on Katara's design on the cover, it has to be Book 2 Katara, plus the mention of Toph being there as well. So this has to be set somewhere between Toph's introduction in The Blind Bandit and the library, because the plot is just continuous basically from the library onwards, and there's gaps basically between all of the episodes from The Blind Bandit all the way up to the library. So it could be basically anywhere in that gap. Most people are maybe predicting it's probably maybe this is our sort of Team Avatar event during Zuko alone. That's the only episode we don't really get to see the gang, and here is a story that could realistically take place there. I see potential for this story, because it's like, okay, cool, solo book, Katara on her own with pirates. We're going to be out at sea dealing with like ships and boats, and exploring more about, I suppose, pirates and how they work in the Avatar world. We don't know too much about them. It's clearly going to be some sort of a like treasure hunt, or like stealing treasure from somewhere. Katara's going to have to get involved, and there's some potential just with like the character dynamic of like Katara needing to be really tough to kind of keep herself going while she's away from everyone else. Like, that sounds great, except, like, why isn't it just set after Avatar? Like, they can still be pirates where we're set in right now in the comics, so, and it would leave the door open for Katara to, like, learn something completely new that we've never seen her do before on the sea, separated from someone. You just have to come up with a different reason for why she'd be separated from the group. I just think they immediately are, like, super limiting themselves by setting it where they're setting it, in that we know what Katara's character arc is, we know the key points in her journey, and setting this where they're setting it, what is Katara going to learn that we didn't know before? So it kind of just feels like it's a tie-in book for the sake of being a tie-in book. Like that, when the comics were first announced, arguably this is the type of book we were almost expecting, but instead we got really, really eventful and impactful books to start off with The Promise, with The Search, with The Rift, and onwards. So I can't help but look at this, but also feel that we're maybe going a little bit backwards here. And now there's a lot of pressure on those other announcements of what the next Korra book is going to be, what these other formats and approaches actually are, because this feels good as like an extra book to go alongside like a mainline Avatar book and a mainline Korra book. But if this is just the Avatar book, I have to say I'm a little disappointed with the approach here. But what are your full thoughts on the kind of story potential for this, the format, and just this is our next comic?
I don't know. I mean, the idea and the concept of it, like you said, I really like the idea of just having, these sort of extra books that, tell a story that we don't really know about. But considering that we do have, like, the end of the series, and there is, a lot more that could be explored. I see your point of it being, unfortunate that this isn't sort of the future. That is something that, is something that has already happened that we don't know about, but, something that we weren't necessarily sort of like really chomping at to sort of like get this, random side story of what Katara was doing during the specific period, where it seems like, if you follow this show, or you can just backtrack enough, you can pretty much, exactly place it pretty closely, at least as of now. That's what we're thinking, where it actually goes during the story. So that's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it's just something where they're not really ready to do something that's in the future without Mike and Brian, which is why they sort of bought Tim Hendricks on this, because, him being a writer of the show, he obviously, knows just as much as far as placing the characters sort of like in the time period that, we've sort of seen already, but maybe they don't want to sort of commit with him to going forward towards the future. Maybe something like that. I don't know. I mean, I could see that being a possible reason there. So I don't know. I mean, I think, there's definitely good potential here. I like the idea of it being sort of a solo standalone story. I mean, if they do like, one of these for like each of the characters, throughout the whole sort of like timeline of things, I think that'd be pretty cool. I mean, that'd be a nice sort of like collection of individual stories from all the characters. Maybe that's what they're planning to go to, and this will be like one of those series things where they have like each character has their own story, but it still fits in together. I don't know. It could be cool if they did something like that. But yeah, I mean, I do always like the idea more so of them going for the future. And if this is the only thing that we're getting during this period, then that might be a bit sort of unfortunate, just because, we're always sort of looking forward to what's, coming down the line as far as, continue story forward rather than, necessarily going back. So.
Yeah, because I think the thing is, like, there's no problem with going back. It's just going back to cover the right things in a way of, like, cover the Air Nomad genocide. Like, how do we still not know basically anything about that? Like, why is the trading card game the main source of information on, like, the event that causes the main show to be called what it is? It's called Avatar: The Last Airbender because this event happened. Yet we don't know. Like, most fans don't know about the trading card game and don't have that context of, Afiko, Malu, the whole Afiko's betrayal, and like the cards portraying some parts of the attack on the air temples. If you don't know about that stuff, all you know is just the vague details of, like, the Airbenders were wiped out by the Fire Nation, and then, like, Sozin giving a little bit of extra context in Avatar and the Fire Lord. That's all that's covered. Similarly, like Iroh's backstory. Like, why isn't this a Iroh solo story, like covering his backstory in one book? Everyone's been asking for that, yet that's not what it is. And to me, it's hard to just not look at this and just feel like, are they listening to fans like at all about this? And that this book will come out. I'm sure it'll be fun, but will it be worth, the amount of time and effort that went into it? And that's what I'm not sure about, because clearly they put a lot of time and effort into Team Avatar Tales, but no one cares about that book at all. Like, it came out, people bought it, no one's talking about it because there was just nothing in it. And this book sort of has the potential to kind of go down that path as well, because just by setting it where they're setting it, like they're basically saying that nothing so big can happen in this story, because then why doesn't Katara or anyone else mention, hey Katara, what did you get up to that time you went missing? So, it puts a limitation on what you're going to do, unless you are going to do something big and just make it just feel a little weird that it isn't mentioned at any other point. And yeah, I think the other part of this is that, like, okay, this is weird because we've switched Faith Aaron Hicks and Peter Wortman from doing a 3-part book onto a solo book, yet we don't know if they're, like, working on, like, another solo book now. Are they signed on for 3 of them? Is this the new style of Avatar books, if it's now just one-shot books over and over again, or what? And this is where, like, I think the announcement of this wasn't particularly well done, because, this is another case of the book going up on Penguin Random House before the quote-unquote exclusive reveal, in that I think it was like 2-3 days we had it up on Penguin Random House and everyone knew about it, and then finally the Comics Beat article went up exclusively announcing it, with no new information other than what was in the description that we had. And then I think it's just the fact that, like, this is such a shift from everything's been 3-part books apart from our 2 short story collections. Are you not going to explain, like, the creative, like, decision to go down this path and move away from the building Republic City slowly through the 3-part comics, and, seemingly, like, because you can definitely view this as, like, are they just abandoning some of those stories? Like, what about Azula and so on? That's how kind of vague they're being about all of this, while we only have this as the one announcement. In that, like, yeah, if we do get it announced that, like, oh, here's a Sokka story, great, because I think that's probably what we really needed in a way. Like, a Sokka solo story is probably, like, of the main cast, like, the character you really need to do one on. But again, would you want to set it during ATLA rather than what I think most people want is a solo Sokka story, maybe with Suki, set post ATLA where we are right now? At least the door's open to do those type of books, but until I think Dark Horse come out and explain what the plan is, we're just left sort of speculating about, like, okay, we assume there's a Korra comic, but does that necessarily mean it's a 3-parter, or is the Korra comic going to be like this? And then is there going to be another book? Like, is there going to be, like, a kind of third pillar type thing of, like, a different style of book that we can get? That's where, like, I'm sort of just confused on the whole thing. Of, like, after seeing this, like, what do you think the next, like, what 1-2 announcements are going to be, or will have to be, based on this?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different routes that I feel like they could really want to sort of take with this, but when, I don't know, with how they have for all the potential stories that they have sort of going forward, and with, I don't know, what we've seen with what they're willing to do so far, I'm not really sure how, I guess sort of what sort of feedback or what sort of input they're taking towards going towards, I don't know, sort of the future stories, I guess, sort of like, if they were to do sort of Sokka in the future, how would they go about that? What sort of, I guess, sort of, I don't know, if we're like, getting Mike and Brian back into it, would that be something that, they would definitely have to have into it in order for that to go forward, or are they willing to go forward with maybe not as much sort of input from them? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and yeah, that's the other thing of like, yeah, this is one of the first books that doesn't mention Mike O'Brien on it, and it is Tim Hedricks instead. And we have a writer involved, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem in that, like,
Yeah.
the writer obviously has some sense of, like, I suppose, feedback from Mike O'Brien. They know the story direction, and like especially Tim Hedrick, who was like involved in Avatar and Korra, especially like really early
Yep.
on.
Yep.
He should be really aware of, like, what story directions were in place for the likes of Inazula or whoever. So I don't necessarily think it should just be a thing where, like, oh, Mike and Brian aren't involved, so we can't do anything. Um, at that point, it's kind of like, well, then we need to sort of change sort of how the creative structure of Avatar kind of works to bring in more people, or just have Mike and Brian like pass off whatever story Bible type thing it is to other people, so we can actually kind of do stuff with this. I do hope it is just that this is a new style of book, and this is just the one that was announced first.
Yeah.
Because it'd be very unfortunate if this is all we got. The other point that I think not a lot of people are talking about is that there is a price increase with this book. Like I said, it's the exact same amount of comic you are getting as like a part 1, 2, or 3 of an individual comic, but it costs $12.99 instead of $10.99. So it's a $2 price increase for no extra from what I can see, and I don't think this is like suggestive of any sort of a like Dark Horse general price increase or anything like that, because I haven't really seen that mentioned anywhere. So again, the lack of like detail surrounding this is just like, yep, this is just what the price is, and everyone's just kind of being like, fine, that's what it is, when I think it's an important kind of factor to keep in play. But what are your thoughts on the book costing more?
Yeah, no, I saw that mention, and that is interesting. I mean, it's not like a huge increase, but still, just the fact that it does cost more. I mean, I wonder if that's just because of it being sort of a one-shot nature that is going to cost more, just, as far as like getting it up and going, or just because of the people involved or something like that. So I'm not really sure about that. I guess it'll really be interesting to see when it comes out, is it really sort of worth it? That'll probably be the main takeaway from that, I would think.
Yeah, and then the only other kind of question I've had, like thinking about this more now, is that with the release date, it's kind of weird because I think about a week or two ago, Peter Wortman posted on Twitter basically saying, like before the book was even announced, of course, saying that this thing he's working on,
Oh
which was an
yeah,
Avatar book, is finished. Like the art is done 100%. Now, obviously, that still means, I suppose, some of the colors will have to be done. I don't know exactly the workflow and stuff like that, and that like Adele Matera would have to get his completed art and do colors. But as far as I'm aware, that is a sort of process that kind of happens like gradually as he completes pages. Like they'd be sent on to her to do, rather than I do all of the art, then you do all of the colors necessarily, as far as I'm aware, anyway. So why is the book only coming out in October? Again, kind of virus kind of comes into play here. Like, has the date been set with that in mind? Because the way it is now, there's a gap of a year between their last book and this book. In that, like, Imbalance Part 3 came out in October as well, and this book is coming out in October. So that's like another thing as well, adding to it, of just the massive delay of like, we basically don't have any books this year. We got Runes of the Empire Part 3, this, and unless they announce the other books is coming out in like November, December, is it just 2 books this year? Despite it being the 15-year anniversary, it's a bit weird that just we're still so in the dark about all of this. But what are your thoughts on that? The scheduling of this, why there seems to be such a big delay or whatever.
yeah. I don't know. It's definitely odd for sure. It seems like it seems like they were really sort of like building up to something, or like they were just holding back a lot so that they could sort of release a lot. But it doesn't seem like that necessarily was a big plan. I mean, I don't know. In that interview, it sounds like, they had a lot of different things that they were sort of pushing through or, had ideas for. We'll see how much of it, gets sort of released or anything like that. Maybe they were just sort of holding back, just waiting, for the right time to do things, which, I can sort of understand, especially since you don't want to like, put everything out there before you've even really sort of started. But, the fact that they're not mentioning at all, at least until recently, that they even had certain things in the works is, is just a bit sort of interesting for, those of us who are sort of, looking forward to the stories and, have, at least in the past, they have had sort of like a pseudo sort of like set schedule for things. And it seems like they're trying to reinvent themselves, which is definitely cool. And it definitely is welcome to do. It just seems odd that they're not sort of sharing any of it yet, at least until recently, even a little bit.
Yeah, like I've been saying this for years at this point, but like I really wish they'd someone would just release some sort of like roadmap for the comics of just like what is the writing intent of the comics. Like, are you aiming to hit certain points in the franchise or what, or is it just like books are announced one by one? Because I think it's very confusing at this point of like, wait, so it doesn't seem like the comics are just going to continue on relentlessly until we hit Republic City. That we, for some reason, like, stop that now, potentially, unless a new creative team comes in to do another trilogy. We don't have any, like, announcement or even, like, I think, rumors about anything like that. So, what's going on there? The fact that now, like, 8 years into the comics, we've decided to tell big stories set during ATLA, like the one time period that I think most fans would kind of acknowledge doesn't need to be particularly fleshed out all the more. So it's confusing, and especially with like Korra comics kind of so early into their run, they only have like the two series. I wonder what's going on there. I still assume there probably will be one more Korra comic trilogy. That feels like it's the way they'll probably go, but again, we're just waiting on more announcements at this point, and we'll see when they happen. So I suppose we'll just kind of do some speculation on the story itself here. Katara and pirates. When we think about pirates in Avatar: The Last Airbender, we obviously think about the pirates from the waterbending scroll episode 9, and then we get to see them again later in the season. And then Team Avatar Tales surprisingly did have another appearance from the pirates as well in the really short Sokka story. They just imply that there was another sort of run-in with them along the way at some point. Now, I don't know if this book will attempt to tie that into anything or not, but is this book referring to those pirates, or are these different pirates? And I suppose that's one of the big questions at this point of like, would the book be better to include them as a nice reference, or to just do something different and have a new group of pirates that we don't know much about and aren't as like maybe comedic as the first group that we have? Because the only other pirate sort of stuff we have is from the Kyoshi novel with the Fifth Nation, like Tagaka and so on, like Water Tribe pirates, which felt really, really cool as like a dynamic. And so Katara interacting with like characters like them would be kind of interesting. But at the same time, like the other pirates kind of do have a bit of a history in that like Katara was the one who stole the waterbending scroll, so she is the main one who has like a feud with the pirates. But I almost feel they'd announce the book with those pirates if it was them, so I think it will be new pirates. But what are your thoughts on just the pirate element of this book? What way do you think they'll go with it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I like the idea of using, the pirates from Kyoshi from those book, just because, like you said, that was a lot more like, I guess sort of like grounded pirates. I mean, I guess just the book and tone in general was a lot more sort of grounded just because of how it was written, the story of it. So that definitely adds some more, seriousness to it. So I think that would definitely be cool. I mean, I could see them definitely going with a new set of pirates. It doesn't necessarily have to be the ones that were sort of already sort of known about. And like you said, it would be, you would think that they would mention it, or, we would see the style of the boat that she's on in the cover. I would think would have more of a callback to those pirates if it was, from them, or, even like the other boat that they had during the episode. No, so I don't know. I think it would be cool if it's something new, even if it is, a story during a time that we already know. There's definitely newer elements that I think they could add to the story that definitely would be pretty cool.
Yeah. And then like the one thing Faith Aaron Hicks and Peter Wortman said about this book on Twitter, like basically just posting the announcements, was just that like there is a lot of boats in this book, so that gives us the impression it is set like almost completely on the water, on boats, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. So it's not just that it involves boats for like a section, it is like the entire story. So that is interesting. And yeah, the cover is the main thing to go off, I suppose, in that like it is a weird looking boat. Like that doesn't look like any sort of boat, especially pirate boat that I've seen. In that the front is sort of very kind of square rather than like what you'd expect of it being sort of like curved like an actual boat. And then especially the sort of chain bit on the front, it almost gives the impression that like the front bit's like a ramp that kind of comes down and it's like a landing craft or something like that. Combined with the fact that it's like kind of red wood instead of the kind of typical sort of color of like wooden ships we've seen in Avatar before. And most notably, the design on the front to me is like, is that dragon? That's what it looks like to me. The kind of the big snout, the kind of whisker-like things coming off the side, the large mouth with the fangs that you can sort of see. So like Fire Nation pirates, maybe, or just a ship that comes from the Fire Nation. That's what I'm thinking straight away. But what do you get from the cover, the design of this boat?
Yeah, no, I thought that was the most sort of interesting thing to see from this because it definitely feels very unique from what we've seen so far. I mean, it almost seems like more like tribalistic in nature of design of the boat rather than what we've seen before, from like sort of the Fire Nation or typical sort of water tribe or any other sort of like larger ship that we've seen before. It definitely feels more grounded, more, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that there are, that they mentioned that there are so many like different boats, it could really be sort of anything. No, she could have just commandeered this from someone really quickly and just sort of used that, or I don't know, maybe it's even one that's sort of more designed with a waterbender in mind as far as actually controlling the ship and the water and stuff like that. So I mean, I think that'll definitely be pretty interesting just to see sort of how she navigates with the boat and just sort of that whole idea. I think the story definitely has some cool elements to it that definitely make it worth reading or worth knowing about, and just the whole idea of water and Katara and pirates and everything. That it sounds like a good combination.
Yeah, and I suppose you're just trying to place it. Like I said, it's between Blind Bandit and the library. It has to be where it's set, just because it mentions Toph, so it has to be post Blind Bandit. It can't be after the library because the library transitions into the desert, and that transitions into the whole Bossing Say arc, which is like the entire rest of the season. There's no spot in those rest of the episodes to feature this event, basically. So unless so especially with the way it goes, like there's no way that this would be set in between it, unless they really stretch things to fit it in between book 2 and 3. But I don't necessarily think that works. That like, would Katara leave Aang unconscious like in between seasons to do this? I'm not really sure. So again, because of the way it describes it, that she has to rendezvous with the rest of them after they're attacked, again, that leads me to believe it's in the middle of book 2. And then like in terms of locations where they are around that point, like nothing overly springs to mind. Like they're always somewhere like near water. There's always the potential to just be on the coast at some point. So they can just really set it wherever they want to with regards to that sort of stuff. But yeah, like the setup here is like, okay, Katara manages to evade capture by the Fire Nation by joining up with a group of pirates, or like, again, like it says they're allies, so like, is it just they're allies because the pirates also don't like the Fire Nation, or are we dealing with like two groups of pirates and stuff like that? There's a few different ways they could go about it, for sure, but I suppose the other thing is just that the name of the book, and the pirate silver, like this, they specifically mention it's silver, not gold. So, like, is there any significance to that? And then I think probably what would make this book interesting, given that there probably won't be anything huge like with Katara's character development, would be like really turning that into like the search for some sort of a like legendary treasure from the past, and covering like pirate history of like here is the legendary pirate of the Avatar world, like the equivalent of your kind of like Blackbeard or whatever in the Avatar world. That's the direction like I'd want to go with it. That like they tell her about this treasure map from this pirate from like 100 or 200 years ago, and they go from there. They go to a location we're not overly familiar with. If it was Fire Nation specific and like they visited like one of the outer fire islands, that'd be pretty cool. Or just some other island that we have never seen before. There's potential just with like I suppose world building stuff to make this kind of more impactful, because you're gonna have to explore some areas to search and probably introduce us to a new area. I doubt this will be set in places we know already, but what are your thoughts on just some of those details? The fact that it's pirate silver. How do you think they'll go about introducing the story of whatever search for treasure there is?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that Katara is on her own, sort of in this sort of mode of, I don't know, searching for silver or searching for some sort of treasure. I don't know. It just makes me wonder how does this actually sort of like linking into what we know of the story at that time? Like how, I don't know. I mean, like instead it's not, in theory, it shouldn't be anything super impactful to the character, because of course they don't want to sort of like affect anything else later down the line. So it can't be anything too serious, but just, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that it's sort of dealing with, sort of the pirates, which she's had issues with before. I wonder if there's something else that, she deems worthy enough that she sort of has to sort of, she's been forced to go on this sort of like side quest, even though it's really just sort of like the intermediate point for her to just sort of join back up with the group. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how much of a bearing, the whole idea of the pirate silver. I mean, I'm guessing it's just it's just part of the story that they're sort of writing for this, which, will probably make way more sense when we actually read it.
Yeah, and like it's one of those things where like the currency, they sort of switch it depending on where they are. Like each of the nations like pretty much has their own currency, except I think the Air Nation has a specific currency. But either way, like we've seen like the Earth Kingdom, like they have the kind of gold pieces, silver pieces. That's what's mentioned when it's like discussed of like payment for things, and like we're still nowhere near like yuan's being introduced at this point, of course. So like silver, like it must be like older money or whatever. There's some potential with it, whatever way they go with it. Especially like if they really kind of go into like the Avatar world's version of pirates, you can get into some of that stuff. Long John Silver and all these kind of funny names. Like they could definitely do some stuff with that. It's definitely one of those things where like this kind of has to be, I suppose, like the equivalent of say like Aang in the Blue Spirit, where he effectively has sort of like a solo adventure in that episode with the rest of the team out of action at that point. And so he's like, oh, he goes up to this mountain to try and get this medicine, but comes across the Yuyan archers and ends up in Zhao's fortress and meets Zuko. It probably has to be something like that, where it's like they're in some part of the Earth Kingdom, she gets on this ship, they go down the coast a bit, and then do the mission to get the treasure, and then they bring Katara back to like where she started or somewhere close to there. You definitely would question like, okay, how does she actually reunite with the rest of the team? Obviously the rest of the team would have Appa still at this point, so they can search for her, but what way do they do it? Especially when they're saying sort of like they're allies. So like, is it actually that the pirates are going to be sort of villains and Katara has to keep her wits about her, or what? There's potential here. Like, there's the only other interesting angle they could take on this, if it is Water Tribe pirates, then Katara could potentially learn like certain waterbending moves from pirates about
That would be
like
cool. Yeah.
waterbending in relation to like sailing. Like we sort of see her do some of that stuff like when we meet her in like book 3, like when the attack comes in and like I think it's the first episode, she's doing all the stuff like, you know, cloaking the ship in like mist, which is something like she hadn't kind of done before. So maybe little things like that she'll learn more about, like waterbending to like control the currents around the ship or whatever. That could be something she learns from Water Tribe pirates or what. Or maybe they specifically need her because she is a waterbender. That's probably going to be something along the lines that
Yeah.
like some island is like protected by like whirlpools around it and they need a waterbender to get through. Like you can see the sort of setup of just some sort of like geographical like thing. Like, you know, the Serpent's Pass is a geographical thing. The Great Divide now, maybe there's a water hazard as well. So there's some potential for sure with this. The main thing is like, is there going to be any takeaway from this? I suppose is the big question. But do you think we'll get anything on the other characters really in this book, like when Katara comes back or anything like that? Do you think we'll get any Aang, Toph, Sokka action here at all?
I mean, action-wise, I would think probably not, because it just doesn't seem like it's going to be the focus of the book. I mean, I could definitely see sort of like the resolution sort of end pages, maybe sort of like a recap of what Katara went through with, you know, sort of the whole group together when she does sort of meet back up with them. But I don't, unless there's like a big reason for them to sort of come in sort of like, you know, the later half of the book because it's something that she just can't handle, or, you know, maybe it's just better to sort of have them in there just because of whatever the main sort of issue is, then I could see them. But otherwise, from what I'm, you know, thinking so far of this, it doesn't seem like there's really as much of a need to have them in here.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting. Like, I sort of wonder as well with the cover that like you don't see any other characters on the boat. So, like, does Katara have to do this on her own, like a specific part of the mission on her own, or what? Because like it looks like it's kind of a smaller boat, but I don't know. Like it's hard to tell for sure. But like this is one where we could definitely use a little bit more information. It would have been nice if there was like a little bit of a creator interview with the announcement, just to give some context behind sort of like why this story, why are we going back here, what's the significance of this, just because there are so many other like character solo adventures set anywhere else in the universe that could be, I think, more impactful than this. But we'll have to wait and see what the announcement is. I suppose the final thing is just what do you think is going to be the case with the Faith Aaron Hicks Peter Wortman creative team? Do you think they're just doing kind of one-shot books like this from now on, or is something different happening?
I don't know. It's, you know, they can't do all of them at the sort of same sort of time, so I don't know. I guess they might have to sort of do one or the other. I don't know. I don't know. I think, you know, the team itself is obviously awesome. Like, all their stuff is really good. So that part is definitely not the issue. But as far as, you know, where they're putting their time as for like the stories that, you know, I guess sort of most fans would want to see. I mean, I don't know. This definitely seems like it has some potential to it, especially if they were able to do it maybe in a different sort of time period. So I don't know. I mean, do you want sort of these, or do you want sort of the 3-part ones that sort of, you know, take a lot longer to come out and produce? I don't know. It's sort of up in the air right now with what they're sort of going for right now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, like my only concern for this creative team is that, you know, the 2 books, the 2 stories that they're doing now have been like, don't seem particularly eventful. Like, Imbalance in the grand scheme of things wasn't the most like notable book, and this again doesn't really seem like that way. And it's in complete contrast to like a lot of the earlier comics where Gene Yang kind of comes across as like the riskiest writer like out there with like the stuff he was doing in the earlier comics. With like, you know, the promise from Zuko to Aang in the promise, like he wrote the Ursa book. He wrote The Search for Zuko's mom, and the new book, the 2020 book, is Katara and Pirates. It's kind of, there's a bit of a disconnect between like where the comics have been and where they are right now. But that said, we've just come off like the really good Kubira book, Ruins of the Empire, so it's not that they've completely lost track of like telling important stories. It's just the consistency isn't quite there in the same way it was earlier on. But I think that's most of what we want to talk about here. It's a little unfortunate that we've been waiting so long for this, and we will still be waiting a long time for this book to actually come out. And it's not the most discussion-worthy book, whereas if it was another three-parter, at least there'd be probably a bit more to talk about. In terms of other news, there has been, I think, one or two smaller like updates, if you can call it that, from Mike and Brian about the Netflix show. Basically, summing them up, it's just that the show effectively has been delayed. They basically like acknowledge that like, oh yeah, I know like initially it said that the show would be out in like 2020. That's not the case anymore. It's taking longer than expected, and I think he even mentioned like that even though a lot of places are sort of like shutting down with the virus, they're still so early in production on it that they can still sort of work on where they're at, because it's just like a very small sort of writing team doing the pre-production stuff on the show. So they're still very, very, very early in that show. So that was, I think, a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people. Not really myself, just because we'd heard nothing about it at all. So, I still remain not particularly interested in the Netflix show, but it was nice to finally get some context for like, okay, it's still probably like a year and a half off, if not more. But what are your thoughts on the kind of updates from the creators about the Netflix show?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, they've seemed like they've been working at a pace where they're not, in any sort of like serious sort of like, hard sort of like deadline to sort of do it. They were, it seemed like from the beginning that they were always sort of like taking their time, that they really sort of want to do it right, especially, considering what's happened before with other live action adaptations, and just, just in general, just it seems like their flow is a lot more, methodical as far as like thinking things through and stuff. So I don't know, I guess it's not too surprising that they haven't really got too far. And with everything that's going down, even if they had gotten to the stage where were actually in sort of like production, it wouldn't be happening now. So maybe it's better that they haven't gotten that far, all things sort of considered.
Mm-hmm. And then I suppose just to wrap things up, and that like we've been talking about how like a lot of stuff is either like reprint books or like we're waiting ages for the next comics. But we do have other content coming out. The next Kyoshi novel, of course, Shadow of Kyoshi, is coming out July 21st, and I don't think there's been an update or anything like that on it relatively recently, but it doesn't seem like it should necessarily be affected by things. In that, like, we'd be hoping maybe this is in or around like June, July is maybe the tail end of what's happening. So hopefully the book does manage to come out. Similarly, the paperback version of The Rise of Kyoshi is out on June 9th. There is an audiobook version for, I think, both of these. I think I was looking it up a few days ago and I saw that like there was a listing somewhere for like Shadow of Kyoshi audiobook as well. But I think we only have details on the Rise of Kyoshi one, and I think initially it was scheduled for May. It might still be, because there's not a lot of kind of clear information about it, but it might be delayed until August. I'm not really sure on that. Again, I saw the May listing in one place, the August listing in another place, but we have Kyoshi stuff at least in the sort of coming months, which should be really, really good when we do finally get it. And yeah, that's most of kind of the stuff that we have. And I suppose Korra Funko Pops will hopefully be coming out, and I believe the Aang statue that was announced at Toy Fair also has like an August release date officially. So there's other stuff. It's not just that it's nothing until October basically, but I understand why like it's a bit hard to be like, oh wow, like it's gonna be like 8 months between like new stories in terms of the comics. That's a bit kind of tough to take. But yeah, that's basically the podcast for today, just covering the news. The next podcast will probably be our re-review for the Rift comic. We already did one on The Promise, looking back at that. Then we look back on The Search. So the next book is The Rift. So probably in the next week or two, we'll hope to organize that one and get that one out to continue our sort of slow but steady progress back through the comics to see where they've been. But yeah, other than that, that has been episode 209 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.